practices proposed regulations, and then Major Fowler will take over and he will walk through the hunting coyote with hounds regulations. So we're talking about best management practices for trapping. We are actually the only state in the nation, as far as I know, that has tried to take what were recommendations and convert them to regulations. So there was no template for us to follow. So this has taken us quite a while. We've actually been working on this for almost a year. I think we started in July of last year. And we began with the 2022 legislature. They passed Act 159. They directed the department and the board to come up with recommendations for best management practices for trapping that would improve specifically animal welfare and selectivity. And they went on to say the BMPs shall be based on investigation and research conducted by scientists and experts at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and shall use the best management practices for trapping in the United States issued by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies as the minimum standards. And you'll see the picture on the board up there is the picture of this monograph. This is a prestigious Journal of Wildlife Management monograph that actually presents an overview of the BMP research project that's gone on for the last 25 years, national research project. So let me just talk a little bit about one slide about what are best management practices for those of you who don't know. And in this case, they were, there's a national research effort, like I said, started in 1997, I believe. And basically there have been 2,000 pairs of trappers and trapper technicians out on the landscape across 41 states testing traps. Vermont actually participated in this effort maybe 8-10 years, something like that. And those technicians would send back the data to statisticians who would then analyze the data to ensure that there was the bias was eliminated. The protocols for the data and the protocols for the whole study were actually set up by the International Organization for Standardization. And they resulted in best management practices for trapping. And some of you may have seen the booklets that are available that help to show you what types of traps and trapping systems you might use for different species. The goal behind this effort was improving animal welfare, improving selectivity, efficiency, practicability, and safety. And based on the international standards, which, like I said, is the premier standardization setting group in the world, it's they basically 59% of the traps passed and 41% failed. So we used the research and the information that we got from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies as closely as we could to try to develop these best management practices. And actually 9,000 animals were sent to veterinarians for necropsy, and that's how they determined whether or not these traps passed or failed by the injury rates. So the legislature actually outlined 7 directives, and we tried as closely as we could to stick to those directives. And I will refer back to these as we go through the regulations, just so you can see which regulations actually address which directives. But I'll go through these one at a time right now. So they directed us to propose trapping devices that are designed to minimize injury to a captured animal. They directed us to establish criteria for adjusting or maintaining trapping devices so that they operate correctly and humanely. They required that we recommend trapping techniques, including appropriate size and type of traps for target animals, use of lures or other attractants, trap safety, methods to avoid non-target animals. They recommended requirements for the location of traps at a safe distance from public trails, class 4 roads, playgrounds, parks, and other public locations where persons may reasonably be expected to recreate. They directed us to develop criteria for when and how live captured animals should be released or dispatched. They directed us to revise the trapper education materials, which I think the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is in the process of doing. And we already have information about best management practices in our current trapper education classes. And then they directed us to estimate what it would cost to fund replacement traps. And we did this estimate. We submitted it in our report to the legislature in January, but as yet, I don't believe there's any funding that's been tagged for this. So what are the recommendations? I'm going to go through these one by one, and you'll see that there's the text that's black, and then you'll see highlighted portions in yellow. And what this is, the board passed the text in black last April. And then the department has subsequently made some recommendations that I put up there in yellow. When you go to your breakout groups, there'll actually be materials at the table that will allow you to review these again, because it's very dense. There's a lot of information here, and I'm actually going to read through it in case you can't really see it that well. But again, don't feel like you have to memorize any of this. Those materials will be at your breakout tables, and you'll be able to look at them again. So basically, this is trying to address legislative charges 1, 2, and 3. So again, remember, 1 is designed to minimize injuries to captured animals. Directive 2 is to establish criteria for adjusting or maintaining trapping devices so that they operate correctly and humanely. And 3 is to recommend trapping techniques, including appropriate size and type of traps for target animals, trap safety, and methods to avoid non-target animals. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets. The first one is that trapping systems should have base plates that feature a center chain mount with a swivel with free moving chain, and at least, and we changed we're recommending, I shouldn't say we changed it because this is just a recommendation, that the board consider changing that from 1 swivel to 2. Additional swivels that allow mobility for captured animals. That foothold traps on land must be anchored with a maximum of 18-inch chain. Extra swivels and or shock springs can be added to the chaining system. Foothold traps on land must be triggered by all traps that are triggered by downward pressure must be adjustable for pan tension. Foothold traps on land must be padded or offset and laminated with a minimum jaw thickness of no more than 5/16 of an inch or fully encapsulating the foot. Foothold traps on land must have a jaw spread of no more than 6 and, actually I need my glasses to see the little, 6 1/4 inches measured inside the widest expanse of the jaws. The board in the last vote actually included legalizing drags, and the department is recommending that maybe that be taken out until drags have been tested through the BMP research effort. Issue 2, body gripping traps, and this one is addressing legislative charge 3 again, which is to recommend trapping techniques that include appropriate size and type of trap for target animals, trap safety, and methods to avoid non-target animals. So again, 4.6, a person shall not set a body gripping trap with a jaw spread opening greater than 60 square inches measured inside the widest expanse of the jaws unless the trap is 5 feet or more above the ground or in the water. The board voted no meat-based baited body gripping trap shall be set on the ground unless placed within an anchored enclosure with an opening no greater than 60 square inches and with a trap trigger that is recessed at least 12 inches from all openings. The department is recommending take out the meat-based and say no body gripping traps shall be set on the ground unless placed within an anchored enclosure, blah, blah, blah. 4.8. The board voted meat-based body gripping traps with a jaw spread up to and including 60 square inches can be used on land if the trap is placed at least 5 feet above the ground. Again, we are recommending that body gripping traps with a jaw spread up to and including 60 square inches can be used on the land if the trap is placed at least 5 feet above the ground. The changes by removing meat-based basically means that all body gripping traps have to either be 5 feet off the ground in the water or in an enclosure that's anchored. Issue 3, baits and lures. This again addresses legislative charge 3, which directed the department to address the use of lures and other attractants. And this is to minimize the capture of non-target species, particularly avian species. 4.9, all meat-based bait shall be covered at the time that a trap is set. Covering shall include, but are not limited to, brush, branches, leaves, soil, snow, water, or enclosures constructed of wood, metal, wire, plastic, or natural materials. And issue 4, trails and public highway offsets. So the board actually voted to require that foothold traps on or within 25 feet of a traveled portion of a public highway or trail must be in the water or 5 feet above the ground. And the department is recommending, mostly for simplicity's sake, that both foothold and conibear traps, an offset should be 50 feet. So it reads, the recommended reading right now is no body gripping traps on or foothold traps shall be set on or within 50 feet of the traveled portion of a town trail, public trail, or highway, unless set in the water. This setback requirement shall not apply to public trails and class 4 highways located in wildlife management areas. And the reason for that is wildlife management areas have been many of them have been purchased with dollars from hunters and trappers and are there for wildlife-based recreation, including hunting and trapping. The definitions, and it's important to understand the definitions as they apply to this particular proposed regulation. So public highway, for the purposes of this rule, means roads, including class 4 roads, shown on the highway maps of the respective towns made by the Agency of Transportation, but does not include foot trails or public roads. Public trail, for the purposes of this rule, means a pedestrian footpath on Vermont state-owned public land open to the public and designated and mapped by the managing agency or department. Again, not including wildlife management areas. And then the department's recommending that we add town trail, which shall mean a public right-of-way as defined in 19 VSA 3018, shown on the highway maps of the respective towns made by the Agency of Transportation. So it's hard to see this, but this is the town of Bridgewater. Basically, all the lines on that map would require a 50-foot offset. Issue number 5, humane dispatch, and this covers, let's see, I guess, let me just see here, which one is it? The directive number 5. Yep. So develop criteria for when and how live captured animals should be released or dispatched. So the board voted at in the April meeting to include the following language. Dispatch of trapped animals. Upon discovery, a trapper shall immediately dispatch a live trapped furbearer with a muzzleloader, gun, crossbow, or bow and arrow. This provision may be amended upon receipt of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies recommendations regarding humane dispatch. This subsection shall not be interpreted to prevent a trapper from releasing an unharmed captured animal or a domestic pet. And the reason why they put in the part about the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is there's actually a working group that's working on dispatch guidelines right now, but they haven't quite completed those. And once they send those to us, we might revisit this again. So that's basically all of it in a nutshell. If you want more information, you can go on our website to the top web address, and you'll see the report that we submitted to the legislature, which is a previous iteration of all of this. So it's not the same language as what I just went through with you tonight, but also other materials. And if you want to learn more about best management practices, Bryant White and Nathan Roberts, for those of you who weren't there, gave a presentation at the November public meeting, and that is on our website on a YouTube video, and it goes into way more depth than I went into tonight on what best management practices are and what went into creating them. So I will pass it over to the major. Thank you, everybody.
Welcome, everybody. So the other reason we are here is to talk about the practice of pursuing coyotes with the aid of hounds. So Legislative Act 165, which came out of the 2022 legislative session, put a moratorium on the practice of pursuing coyotes with aid of hounds, with a couple of pretty stringent exceptions for landowner and damage type situations. Moratorium went into effect on July 1st of 2022. And essentially there was no coyote hounding in the state of Vermont until such time as the Fish and Wildlife Board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife could come up with regulations to govern the practice. Okay. The legislature also put more restrictions on it. The legislature basically said they don't want any more than 100 permits issued in a given year, and only 10% of those permits can be issued to non-residents, and that is based on the number of resident permits from the previous year. They also put in there land or for training season for non-residents, and we'll get into the training seasons and the hunting seasons in a little bit. The training season for non-residents is tied directly to the home state of that houndsman. So if they don't have a open training season in their home state, they can't come to the state of Vermont and train their dogs here. And then the other part is there's more restrictions for this practice when it comes to landowners. So a coyote hounder cannot go on posted property unless they have written permission from the landowner where they are running their hounds. And then above and beyond that, if the property is unposted and the property owner does not want hounds on their property, and then they inform law enforcement, and then law enforcement informs the hound hunter or a member of their hunting party, then that hound hunter cannot go back to that piece of property. And if they do, there's penalties, which we'll get into in a little bit. So when the department looked at it before they brought stuff to the board, basically what we did was we took the bear hound rule and adopted much of it for the pursuit of coyotes with aid of hounds. A lot of the stuff is going to be very, very similar. There's some notable exceptions. When we get to them, I'll kind of point them out. So the other parts of this that the legislature mandated is there needed to be a limit on the pack size, so the number of dogs that can be on a hunt for coyotes. There was a prohibition on the substitution of dogs, so no relaying, which is already in the bear rules. So if folks did that, they should be used to that already. Then there was a definition of control that would minimize the likelihood that dogs will enter land posted against hunting or where the pursuit of coyotes with dogs is not authorized. Goes back to what I talked to you a few minutes ago or a second ago about the landowner stuff. There is also a requirement for all coyotes that are killed during the pursuit with hounds. They have to be reported to the Fish and Wildlife Department. They also said that the board should consider seasonal restrictions and baiting. So as a direct result of that legislative act, there was 2 new laws that came into effect in the state of Vermont in 2022. This is one of them. It is Title 10 VSA 5008, and it is titled, hunting coyotes with the aid of dogs. This is where it lays out and gives the commissioner permission to have the permits. It lays out the number of permits, which is 100 permits total annually. It lays out that only 10% of those permits can go to non-residents based on the total number of permits from the previous year. It also lays out the training season for non-residents is tied to the home state. And then it lays out the fee structure, and basically for a resident, it is $50. For a non-resident, it is a $10 application fee. And then if they are granted a permit, it is $200 to obtain that permit. The other law that came out is Title 10 VSA 5009, and that is the pursuing coyotes with the aid of dog, and that is the landowner permission, and that is the actual statutory language of what I just described to you just a few seconds ago about if it's posted, written permission is required ahead of time, and if it's not posted, and the landowner doesn't want the hunter there, they have to notify law enforcement. Law enforcement has to notify the houndsman or someone in their party, and then they cannot go back. It also lays out the penalties for this in this state statute. Okay, if you look down at C, the first offense of a person who violates this, it shall be considered a minor fish and wildlife violation, which would result in 5-point violation. There has not been any fine associated with it yet. That'll come later. And then number 2, it basically lays out that any subsequent offenses would be a 10-point violation. So, as far as the legislative mandates, the limit of dogs. So there's terminology in there, and it is department registered dogs. And basically what that means is when the department issues a bear or a coyote hound permit to a hunter, it will come with brass tags that are fixed to the dog's collars with numbers on them. And that is what would constitute a registered dog with the department. A pack of dogs. So if a hunter is out, they are only allowed 4 dogs to pursue coyotes, which is down from bears. The bear, it is 6. So it is more restrictive than that. The other part of it was legal method of take, which falls in line with virtually every other piece of hunting that we do in the state of Vermont. Okay. So the legal means of taking coyotes with the aid of dogs include the utilization of a muzzleloader, gun, bow and arrow, or crossbow. Basically lays out that if someone chooses to use archery equipment, whether that's a compound bow, longbow, whatever, or a crossbow, they have to have archery ed. That's being folded into all new regulations just to have everything kind of standardized. And then the same thing with the last bullet point down there, it discusses the minimum standard for a broadhead, which is 7/8 of an inch with 2 sharp cutting edges, which is standard in many of our regulations. Definition of control. So I will read this one to you verbatim. The transportation, loading, or unloading of dogs from a vehicle and the handling, catching, restraining, releasing dogs to pursue coyote. GPS collars with track log and training/control functions or separate GPS and training control collars shall be required to locate and track dogs at all times when in pursuit of coyotes. At no time shall a dog be in pursuit of coyotes without a GPS track log being maintained by the permit holder. Essentially what this means is if they are out there pursuing coyotes with hounds, they have to have a collar that tracks and a training collar that, get down below it, training and control collars is any in a family of collars that delivers electrical stimulation of varying intensities and duration to the neck of a dog via a radio-controlled electronic device incorporated into the collar. So they will have to have both of those or one collar that has both of those functions. So it has to be a tracking collar and it has to be a control collar. Required reporting. So every coyote that is taken with the aid of dog, the permit holder is going to be required to report all of those within 48 hours of the close of the season in a manner that has been required by the commissioner, and the commissioner has yet to establish that. But that'll get done later on in this process. And then at the very bottom, it basically says no coyote carcass will be taken out of the state of Vermont unless it has been reported in the manner directed by the commissioner. Seasons and shooting hours. So the coyote hound training season for Vermont residents and non-resident permit holders is June 1st through September 15th. Bearing in mind for non-residents, they have to have a training season open in their home state to come here to train. The June 1st to September 15th falls in line with virtually every other dog hunting and training season that we have. I already talked about the non-residents. So the coyote hunting season will be December 15th through March 31st for those pursuing with hounds. The regular hunting season isn't affected by this. It's just ones that are pursuing coyotes with the aid of hounds. December 15th through March 31st. Legal hunting hours, most other things are the same, 1/2 hour before sunrise until 1/2 hour after sunset. And that it is in a nutshell for the coyote hounding part. Mark?